The First Million Words, Episode 24, Luke Burrage Part 2. Let's talk about learning from others, which is kind of what the show, originally was about, except, we take a more direct approach where we actually bug authors until they get on our show. Yeah,
it's a great approach. So what you need to do is, the thing is, I'm a reviewer, I'm a book reviewer, and the way that I first, and this ties back to what we've talked about previously about how to complete a project, and this is very important, that you need to write a project which you find interesting, that you find good, and that brings it back to who was the author in June that you were doing, Rachel Aaron.
Rachel Aaron, yes.
Rachel Aaron. She said something. Hey, what you need to do is, if you're getting bogged down in something, you probably need to come up with you probably need to answer the question, what aren't I finding interesting about this scene that it's taking me so long to write? I think that was what she said, wasn't it? And not only does what's not interesting about this scene, which is making it not interesting for me to write, therefore for me to finish this project and write it, I need to make it more interesting, or more, more conflict in the scene, or resolve the conflict better. It also makes the novel much better. I think that was the takeaway, wasn't it? That, it's like when you actually look at everything, the easier it is for you to read, the easier it is and more enjoyable it is for people. No, the easier it is for you to write, and the more enjoyable it is for you to write, the easier it is and more enjoyable it is for people to read. Great advice. And she says, if there's a section which isn't working for you, how about rewriting it, coming up with, not so much rewriting it, but reformulating the purpose of that scene. What I did with Minding Tomorrow, and again with the final novel in that series, which is called Broken Glass, I was and as well the middle one as well, Combat, is that I was writing a story in a way which, first of all, in Minding Tomorrow, didn't need to be told chronologically, and skipped around from character to character quite a bit, and each scene served a purpose, and I knew very clearly what each scene would be. Now, Minding Tomorrow I wrote as a NaNoWriMo, and I thought, well, if every day I've got to write 2,000 words, or however much it is. It's like 1,000. What is it? 1,666 words or something every day.
Yeah.
Isn't it something like that?
Some kind of evil amount. Yeah.
Yeah. So some number like that. And I was just thinking, and there's going to be 30 days. How about every day I sit down and write a chapter? Now, some chapters are going to be a bit longer than that, and some chapters are going to be a bit shorter than that. But I just have a list of chapters here which I need to write, and actually there was actually many more chapters of that in a way, and I was like, okay, let's start writing. So in the first day I was like, right, I know one of the
sorry about that.
No problem. I knew sort of like, okay, at some point in the story I need to address this point, so I wrote that chapter, and then in this point I need to do this, and so I wrote that chapter. Now, because the novel was being told non-chronologically, I didn't have to write them in order, and in fact I did actually swap them around quite a bit afterwards. And the first chapter that I wrote, which was a setup, I just got rid of because it wasn't needed, and later chapters in there I got to the point where I'd actually finished everything that I needed to tell the story, and I was like, well, I've still got 2 days to go, what can I do? And I was like, and I've still got 1,500 words to go, what can I do? So I just wrote another 2 quick chapters, which I slotted in, which I really enjoyed, and they don't add anything to the story, but they just explain a little bit of thematically, and they explain a little bit of a character moment, and one character just says, oh yeah, this, and I once did this, and another character just replies, oh yeah, it's just a small conversation which doesn't fit into the overall chronology of the story, but it was just there, and it was really nice and really interesting, and so I wrote it and put it in. And nice. And the reason I could do that, first of all, was because I wasn't interested in getting this story published, or I didn't think that story would be a story that anyone would want to publish as a first novel of an otherwise unknown writer. And this really brings it to me where you can learn from other people. What is the favorite novel by your favorite author? Was it their first novel published? Maybe. But it was probably their third novel, because by the third novel they proved that they can finish a story, they proved that they're selling, and by the third novel they can pretty much write what they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if it's a little bit experimental, and it doesn't really matter if it's anything like that. For example, for me, the first book that I read and reviewed for the Science Fiction Book Review podcast, that I gave 5 stars to, was Use of Weapon by Ian M. Banks. And I gave it 5 stars. And if you read that, you'll realize that everything that I enjoyed about that novel, not everything, but so many of the things that I really enjoyed about that novel, I put into Minding Tomorrow. It freed me up when I realized that this was a novel that he released. It was one of his first novels that he ever wrote, and he had already released 2 novels, and a friend of his said, hey, I really think you should get out Use of Weapons. You should really bring this general character back and finish off that novel, and he did it. And if that was his first novel, it would have never been published, because nobody would take that novel and publish it. You start reading and going, what? What's going on? There was a non-chronological timeline. One timeline was going forward in time. One set of chapters are being told forward in time. Another set of chapters are being told in reverse chronology, and they kind of meet in the middle. It's a weird time structure, and I was like, why did I find that fascinating, and why did it work? And so with Minding Tomorrow, I took that same idea. I was like, hey, I don't need to tell this story in order, because I tried that. I tried writing the novel 2 or 3 times before and got a part of the way, and I was like, wow, this is really boring at this part. Why am I telling it's like, because he starts off and he just has to spend a lot of time not doing anything for a long time for the end of the novel to make sense. And I was just like, I don't have to write that bit. I can all of that time that he's not doing anything, I can just skip. And I don't even have to present it. So it's not, the boring stuff doesn't happen at the beginning of the story. Even though that boring stuff had to happen for the story to make sense, I could just put it later on in the novel and just tell it through some vignettes here and there. These like short chapters of only 1,000 words long or 2,000 words long. And it freed me up reading a novel, which was a novel which he admitted, even Ian Banks admitted, that he would never have been able to sell as a first novel. But he wanted to write it, and it was a passion for him. It was a story that had been put into his mind. I mean, it had been hanging out in his mind for so long, and he finally found a way to tell it. And he wasn't constrained with, hey, I need to sell a book. So it's the constraints that you put on yourself by writing a book that you think is going to sell, which holds you back from writing a book in the style, in the way, using the tricks and using the methods of your favorite author, doing your favorite work by the author. Like if you read Stephen King, maybe Carrie is his best novel, but it might be his 3rd or 4th or 5th novel. But then, at the time when he still needed to get through the editing process and to have the book approved before he was too big so that he could write anything. Do you understand? There's a limit there. Like for example, with I can't even think of another author, but the authors do go through these phases. They'll write their first book and it's pretty good, and their second and third one comes out and you go, oh no, this is what I was waiting for. And then you get onto book 6 and 7 and you're like, like Ian M. Banks is now. You read it and you go, wow, that could have been a lot tighter, and the stories are really so. The kind of thing that happens there.
Mm-hmm. Nice, yeah. So, that kind of, I know we kind of keep going back to the Brandon Sanderson thing.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to.
I never finished Elantris.
Me too. Yeah, I could not read Elantris.
It was terrible. I was just reading it. I was like, I got about halfway through, and I was just like, meh, that's not for me. But then he put out Warbreaker as a PDF, not a PDF, but like an ebook, like a free ebook. And I was like, oh, free ebook. I'll check it out, and enjoyed it. It was, it's not an amazing book, but way, way, way better than Elantris. And that's a weird thing, because he had already written many books, but now Way of Kings, that's his, I see as his kind of like what I was saying before about a 3rd or 4th novel. He's done these other series, but this is the novel of his which has been hanging out in his head for a long time, and all the cool ideas that he wants to put in there. Yeah, everything that he's ever wanted to put in a novel, he's like, I can put it in this because I've got as much time as I want to put it in. I think it could have been shorter. He should have left out an entire character line and storyline, but there was a lot of interesting stuff in that book, which was, But then, so put in all that interesting stuff, all this interesting things that you want to play around with, viewpoints, comedy characters when there's not normally a comedy character, which I think Guillermo was doing. What is it, the White Trash Trolls or whatever they were, something like that.
Oh yeah. I still haven't read your next chapter. You got to send it to me.
Yeah.
I'm still writing it. That's the problem.
Yeah, but that's the thing. You get this thing. It's like you're thinking, oh, because I've heard you talk about this over the, over the past few months worth of your podcast, and you're talking about this. I'm like, that sounds really interesting. Like, if you just say to me, hey, what's the coolest thing that you can think of to put in a story, or like, what are the not the coolest thing? I'm not even talking about characters or settings or storylines. I'm talking about fantastical ways of telling a story, which you can really only get away with if you're an established author or like a literary author, which is normally left out of science fiction because people write the book to the point. So there's for a positive example is like, take your favorite book by your favorite author, work out what they're doing that you're enjoying, and just copy them. Well, not even copy them, but like put that in yours. And you'll be able to finish the project, and you'll be a much better writer because of it, because you won't be writing to the whims of this probably an imaginary editor and probably an imaginary book deal that you're going to get with this novel at that point. And who knows, maybe it will be good enough to get an editor. But like, if you just write another generic fantasy story, you might get a publishing deal, but you won't have written a classic. And I do think some of these stories where, like the other 2 5-star novels, if you look here on the list here, the other 2 5-star novels is Slaughterhouse 5 and Flowers for Algernon. Both of those stories you would never think, Slaughterhouse 5. Again, for me, it pushed all my buttons because it was a story about if you read Slaughterhouse 5 and Use of Weapons, you realize that the science fictional elements are there. You've still got the timeline set out of time. You've got someone who is obviously delusional and you're not quite sure if they're remembering anything like that. Use of Weapons and Slaughterhouse 5, probably good companion books, and that both of those books have got those elements in them, and they're both my 5-star books. Probably says something about what I enjoy about reading science fiction, and that should probably be the kind of thing that I'm writing. And guess what? You read Minding Tomorrow, my first novel, and then the Combat, which again is about people doing this science fiction elements and war and all these other things which Slaughterhouse 5 and Use of Weapons has in them, and then Broken Glass, which is the final novel in the series. Again, I don't want to say that the companion pieces to Use of Weapons of Slaughterhouse 5, because I consider these as literally 2 of the best science fiction novels that I've read in the past 4.5 years of doing the Science Fiction Book Review podcast. But that's what I'm aiming for. I want my novel series to be as good as Use of Weapons and Slaughterhouse 5. The other 5-star book is Flowers for Algernon. That's 3 books in the last 4.5 years that I've given 5 stars to. And that is what I'm aiming for as both as a writer and as a reader. I'm probably never going to get there. But if I try and not do what I'm passionate about and instead try and aim for a publishing deal, I'm never going to write Slaughterhouse 5 or Use of Weapons or Flowers for Algernon or the other ones here, 1984 or I Am Legend, these other, or Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. I would love to write a science fiction book which brings in all the aspects of religion and all these other things, but that, Lord of Light does, and I realize, of course I love Lord of Light because, on my other writing projects and my other things that I'm doing, I'm studying the Bible, Of course that's going to come into it, and of course I'm going to do that. So why don't I use those aspects into my own fiction? So, there's a positive example. I've got some negative examples if you want them as well, like learning from what you read. But
okay, we have time.
We all know about that. Like every now and then you'll come across one of those that you're like, remember to not do that. Note to self.
Yes, note to self. God doesn't need a starship. Going back to, I just recorded a podcast a few days ago for SFF Audio, and I got into a long rant about how it was quite a big rant about how I didn't like how authors are proud of their. Again, this comes back to, do you want a publishing deal or do you not, or do you want to enjoy the art of writing and the craft of writing or not? If it's an art or a craft, different subjects there as well. But and it comes up like someone like Kevin J. Anderson. I think didn't you mention on a podcast before that he writes by going for a walk and talking into addictive.
He like walks around the mountains and stuff, and yeah.
You know what? His novels read to me as though they're made up by someone who's walking and not actually looking at the words that he's writing and not having a plan in front of him and not doing anything. And I'm not kidding. His scene start. It's like at any one time he's only got one thought in mind. And that's all he's doing now. Of course, I said previously that you can only, like, every chapter should have, like, a main point for that chapter to get to and lead up to. And you get to it and you're like, great, that's that chapter. And I did everything I wanted to do. But that can't be one thing. I mean, that can't be the only thing that's going to happen in that. There has to be different levels. There has to be characters. There has to be setting. There has to be plot, machinations. There has to be thematic explorations, and it's really difficult to keep all of that in your head without having any notes and all that kind of stuff. And it's just you're reading and just going, what the fuck's going on? This chapter was only a page and a half long, and I realized, oh yeah, if I was writing and I couldn't keep track of everything that was going to happen in a chapter and all the characters, it would probably be about a page and a half long, and not a lot would happen except one person would say something to the other. It's like, I'll find a story to tell.
And part of that may be, I don't know, maybe part of that is just pride. It's like, no matter how shitty the premise, I can make it good.
The thing is, he can't. He can't make it good. It's like, hey guys, how about another Dune novel? It's like, yeah, I think we got enough Dune novels. No, the publishers are going, this is making loads of money. We'll give you like $1 million for every book you read. And it's like, actually, I think Frank Herbert pretty much did okay. He pretty much got everything. Yeah, but in between these two novels, this character didn't. We don't know what that character did. Well, actually, we do know because Frank Herbert said that Paul Atreides had never left. What was the name of his planet that he went to before Arrakis? I don't know. Carino, whatever. No, it's House Carino.
Look that up.
Anyway, the watery planet that it was on. We know that he never left that planet before he left Arrakis, because we're told in chapter 1 of Dune, whereas suddenly that's not true, and his father had another, and you're just reading like Paul of Dune, and you're just like, what the fuck's this? Like, you're just going, what the fuck's going on here? What is going on here? It's written by a person who wasn't concentrating and just talking into a dictaphone. It's like, say no to a project. If a story comes into your head and you're like, is this the story that I want to be writing now? You're probably going to say no because you've got better ideas. Stick with the good ideas. Stick with the ideas that you're passionate about. And don't take the advice of any author who is proud of selling out, who says, I write my fiction so my books can fit into the stands at supermarket checkouts. You've got to try better than that. I'm taking these as two examples of books that I think I gave 0.5 stars to. Let me have a look here. Yeah. Hunters of Dune, 0.5 stars. Snow Crash, 0.9. Always upsets a lot of people. More feedback about giving Snow Crash under 1 star. Hominids by Robert J. Sawyer, 1 star. Calculating God, 1 star. And now that I think about it in my head, probably should have been 0.5 stars. But yeah, it's some of those just look at the worst book you've ever written, then go out and find all the advice that you can by the person who wrote that book, and then do the opposite of all of their writing advice.
Yeah, do not
and I'm
those
not kidding.
things. Yeah.
I'm not kidding about that. When I read Snow Crash and thought it was pathetic, I mean, there's a lot of fun characters in it, there's a lot of fun scenes, but you're reading the story, it's like, wait a second, there's this massive part of the story where our main guy, hero protagonist, the librarian is just telling him everything, and he's going, oh yeah, I'll believe that. Oh yeah, I'll believe that. Oh yeah, I'll believe that. And it goes on for like 15 pages of someone just telling all the information that another character needs to be able to go through the end of the novel. Then he gets to the end of the novel, and then hero protagonist then says all of that stuff to another set of characters to fill in them with the same thing. It's like, wow, I never, ever, ever, ever want to write a book where my protagonist has to rely purely on all of the research that somebody else has done, wrapped up into a package, and then given him so he doesn't have to do any work himself to find out about anything that he needs to get through and solve the riddle at the end of the book. That kind of thing is never going to appear in any of my books. Honor Harrington books, on Basilisk Station, 1 star. I'm never going to have a book which is just people meeting, talking about what's just happened, making plans for what they're going to do next, and then the next chapter is them meeting to discuss what happened since the last chapter happened, and then they're making a plans and then say what they're going to do before the next chapter starts. And then the next chapter starts with them filling, and it was just chapter after chapter after chapter of people meeting in rooms, filling in what happened since the last chapter, discussing what they're going to do before the next chapter happens, and then leaving the room and doing it. No action.
Yeah, sounds like an awful lot of exposition, yeah.
That was it, the whole thing. And again, there were some redeeming qualities of that book, but I can't remember any of them. But I remember what I'm never going to write. So when I read back through Minding Tomorrow and I realized, hey, wait a second, these two characters are just having a conversation about something. I was like, well, I can cut that bit out and I can cut that bit out. I can go and actually have the end of the story, not people saying what they're going to do next, but actually discovering something by the end of the chapter. Never having a chapter which ends with people just discussing what's going to happen next and not showing the author, showing the reader that. Have chapters which end with people making a discovery and them changing them as a character or moving the story on, like by their actions, not by talking. And if it is a conversation, that conversation has to move the story on. You can never have a conversation which is just people planning what they're going to do next. Again, all of these kind of things. I get this because I think about the novels that I read in depth. But every time that you read a book where you're just like, oh, well, that wasn't very good. Like, first of all, work out why it wasn't very good. It could be something like Honor Harrington, where it's just lots of people drinking hot chocolate and, and not doing anything for most of the book except talking and then reporting back. Reporting back and then talking and planning. But yeah, there's lots of stuff that, again, I think that's all I need to say about that. Find a book that you hate. Think back to a book that you hate. Then go and read writing advice by the author. Then go and do the opposite. And I know that's tricky, but if you do get writing advice from someone and you haven't read their book, first of all, go and read their book and work out if you enjoy the book and you liked it and you appreciate it. And then you can do it. In some ways, I enjoy that. With the Writing Excuses podcast, the reason I read Brandon Sanderson's novel is because I'd listened to him on a podcast. The reason I read Dan Wells' novel is because I'd heard him on the podcast, and I read those books and really enjoyed them. Now I have confidence in the advice that they give me. But of course, I was listening to the Michael J. Sullivan interview, and I went into a bookshop and there was his book and I almost just bought it on the spot because I liked his advice so much and it was so close to how I think about writing. Like he's saying that people read his book and they're like, wow, it's really short and you didn't have all the normal fantasy thing of people talking a long time about stuff and people explaining this and explaining the world and lots of big things about the world. It was just brisk and just point, but all of the world building stuff was there, but it was hidden in the background. And in my novel Minding Tomorrow, people go, wow, it was only 50,000 words. It should have been like 100,000 because there's loads more stuff. It was too much. It was too much stuff. It was all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't need to describe what the world looks like. I don't need to do all of that. All I was concentrating on was the character progression of the lead of the protagonist and the science fictional ideas and how they played, how he used this science fictional way to achieve his goals and to grow in a personal responsibility way. I know it's a weird thing to bring my novel down that was the focus of it. I didn't want to spend a long time on this bit of story and that bit of story. I only wrote the scenes that interested me and I only included the details which I thought were pertinent to what was going on. Almost everybody said, wow, that was an intense read because there was so much crammed into 50,000 words that I was normally that would have to be told in 100,000 words, but I got it down to 50,000 words because I took out everything that wasn't necessary and I didn't write everything that wasn't necessary, if you understand what I mean. And that's a big thing about length of novels as well. But then I'm writing a fantasy series, which is like an epic. Well, it's not a series yet; it's a novel, and I've written 60,000 words in it. And I've written just under 60,000 words, and I'm probably around about a third of the way through. That's a long-term project, which I keep going back to. But that's all about description and all about the world and all about this and that, and the story is very significant, but it's not the main thrust of it. It's more about the characters moving around in the world, like a fantasy quest should be, if you understand that.
Definitely.
So yeah, there's different ways there. So anyway, I think that's all I need to talk about reading and learning from what you read.
Yeah,
maybe
I like the idea. Yeah, I like the idea of just rip it off at first.
I think that's about it.
Yeah, that sounds good. Guillermo, did you have anything to add?
No,
in your sleep-deprived state?
oh no, all this is good. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And then I was like, oh, I agree with that, but so I didn't say anything because otherwise
Yeah.
it would have just it would have been me being kind of sycophantic. So it's all right.
Okay.
No, it's good. But again, this is stuff that you might be able to get from other authors, but I think it's often like if you're a published author, you probably won't want to be bad mouthing other authors. As a critic, I can do that. I can just say, hey, check out this book. It's awesome, but check out this one. It's terrible. And do the opposite in your writing. I don't mind doing that. Other authors probably wouldn't be able to get away with that.
Yeah, kind of a glass house situation there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not planning on. Well, maybe I'll get published one day. But after writing for 5 novels and working on others, I've yet to submit any any work anywhere for anything. I don't mind.
Well, great. Well, thanks for stopping by. And again, sorry about all the delaying.
No problem. It was good. We finally got there in the end. Sorry about that. And again, you realize that all that stuff that I just said about learning from what you... did I even answer the question about why I don't submit stuff? It's like, it's not my job. I don't want it to be my job. And that's where I would love to be a professional writer. But I think in that case, I think I'd have less free time to write if I was a professional writer. It's just one of those weird things.
Yeah.
As a professional juggler, I'm very, very lucky. And I guess you guys, as answering phones means you have to stay up late at night. But as a security guard, you do have a little bit of time in that case.
I have nothing but time, yeah.
Yeah, but do you do writing in that case, at work then?
As much as I can, yeah. Lately it's been a little tough to do, but... I
had a friend once who was his security guard, and he had it wasn't a PlayStation because it was before that. He had like a Mega Drive. I think dates this story. No, what do you call it in America? The Genesis, the Sega Genesis.
Oh, the Sega, yes.
Yeah, it was the Mega Drive was the Genesis elsewhere in the world, and he had that, and he spent about a week playing that, and at the end he was like, phew. Yeah, I guess I've got an album to write. He was a musician, and he was like, oh, okay, I can't, I can do video games for 8 hours every night for about a week, and then after that I can do it.
Yeah, I have my rituals at work too, where I have to play solitaire for a little bit, and then maybe a little bit of Minecraft, and then I have to walk around and
build
do
yourself up to it, yeah.
Yeah, and then I have to walk around, and then maybe get on the exercise bike for a little bit, and then I start writing.
Yeah, the reason I could write 36,000 words in in 4 days is because I'm a professional juggler, and that means I work a lot on cruise ships, and that means I spend a lot of time at sea with not a lot to do.
So at what point, how many people ahead of you have to die until you start driving the ship?
No, it doesn't work that way. Maybe on Costa ships in sailing around Italy, but not on the ships that I work on.
Oh.
So in an emergency on a ship, I do nothing. I've got a place on a lifeboat, but I do nothing at all.
Nice, that's a good place to be.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. And everyone else on the ship has some responsibility in an emergency, except the guest entertainers. And there's normally 4 of us on a ship, 3 or 4 of us on the ship.
Nice. Well, yeah, again, like I said, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, stay in touch. If you ever want to do anything else, like